Formerly Canadian as heck, or excuse me, now Canadian as heck.
Yes.
Formerly Canadian AF. This is episode 102. Thank you for joining us. My name is Craig G, alongside my man Derek Lewis. Wow,
no additives,
no expletives tonight, my
no
friend.
expletives. I won't swear. I'm not going to swear this whole show.
Why not? That doesn't make any sense. I can literally see you right now. You're like a kid in a candy store. You're trying not to.
I'm doing it mostly to upset the Army Chris.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Sounds good. All right, poor Army Chris.
Yeah.
All right. My name again.
The whole show.
My name is again Craig G, alongside Derek Lewis. This podcast, Canadian as Heck, we do this every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Last week we had our new bestie on the program. Her name is Jane Siberry, and she was just absolutely wonderful. She introduced us to this fellow who we are going to have the incredible privilege of speaking with this evening. And she's like, check this guy out. Wait till you see what he is doing. Well, kind of not in your spare time, or maybe in your spare time, but we'll essentially get to essentially what you're doing, which is an amazing thing here. So, welcome to the program tonight, Mr. John Chu. Thank you so much for joining us, my friend. We appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so listen, let's dive right into this. John, if you could give us an idea, can you give us a rundown of the things that you do for a living? Because there's a few of them.
For a living.
The last one you said, I was like, that's great. So save that one for the last, so that we all get it again.
Sure. Yeah. I do a bunch of things. I'm a full stack software developer. I develop the election news graphics for a major major private Canadian broadcaster. I work for a nonprofit called the Canadian Media Elections Consortium that gets all of your election data from the government to all of the trusted media sources. So I'm a little bit busy tonight getting ready for British Columbia, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan, all of which have provincial elections. And don't get me started as to what's going to happen in Ottawa in the next, But this is not about that.
Do you have inside information? Do you have inside information?
I do, yeah, but
okay, cool. We don't want it.
That's beyond the scope. Beyond the scope of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I do, and I was trained as a mathematician. My graduate degree is in mathematics. I've got an undergraduate degree in mathematics and computer science and classical studies, or classical Greek to be precise. And the reason for that is I've always had a fascination with words in every language. I grew up in a multi-ethnic household. My father he died earlier this year at the age of 100 as an emeritus professor of linguistics. He spoke 40 languages.
Wow!
So, and like
40.
That's incredible.
40, yes.
40.
Wow.
40. Yes. Every year he would learn a new language during his professional career. Right.
Where do you put that? Like in your head, like where does that go?
In a giant brain, I would think, probably. That's incredible.
I think it's actually the second language that's the hardest one to learn, because once you get your brain stretched in the right way to speak two languages, or to understand languages, or to think in two different ways, then it's flexible enough to get the rest of them. And if you sort of go overboard, then you end up where my dad was.
Because I still don't know French.
I'm not sure you can call yourself Canadian unless you can at least read the side of a cereal box.
I can read some of it.
Yeah.
But I'm interrupting you. I apologize. But I'm just like, I'm still stuck on 40.
That's incredible.
So anyway.
Go on.
My mom was Japanese, and she was a language instructor. She taught Japanese as a Japanese to Americans and Canadians. And so we had like long discussions about words over every meal as I was growing up, and the dining table would be stacked up high with dictionaries on every corner, so we could grab a Japanese dictionary or an English dictionary, or an etymological dictionary, or a French or German one. And so I grew up around dictionaries, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. I thought mathematician, but it's hard work and not enough money in it. And software developer, it's kind of fun. There's a little bit of money in it. But the conversations that I enjoyed most were the ones that I had really growing up with my parents about what do these words mean? Why do Japanese and English speakers look at the world so differently? Like Japanese doesn't have the idea of plural or singular, but English doesn't have the idea of showing respect to people by the choice of your first person pronoun. What's up with those? So fast forward to about 20 years ago, I've lost track now, I started playing Scrabble, and I did that as
being a lover of words.
right. In fact,
Yeah.
I started
Yeah.
playing Scrabble seriously when I was living in France, because I found that I was starting to lose my English fluency. My Japanese fluency was fine because I was sending faxes every week to my mom to tell her how I was doing, and I was having to write a lot more in Japanese. My English, it was a French language working environment, so I was just gradually losing it. And I thought, oh, I can play Scrabble on this Nintendo Game Boy, which kind of dates whenever that was, and that'll keep my English fluency. At least I'll be able to memorize all the 2 and 3 letter words, which, that's the most important part of any language, right, as a Scrabble player. So I come back home to continue my degree, and I think I need to keep playing Scrabble. So I play online, and then I find a local club, and then I start running tournaments, because the guy that was running the Toronto Scrabble Club, which was the biggest and oldest club in the world for Scrabble, the guy that was running it, a guy named Mike Wise, passed away, younger than I am now, and they said, you seem like someone who can organize things and keep them going, and you're already doing all the stats. Can you run this club for us? And I said, sure. I am supposed to do my degree, but yeah, sure, I guess, if you insist. And then they said, that means you've got to run a tournament next month. And I thought, really? That seems like a lot of work. So I ran a tournament. They said, oh, that was great. You should come to, like, Boston and run a tournament there. And you should, run the national championships.
Wow.
And you should go to Bangkok and run this tournament. And you should run world championships all over the place. And so I did that for many years. And I'm still the head of the North American Scrabble Players Association, and I still do an awful lot of stuff that's Scrabble related. But we haven't even really touched on the subject of this interview yet. I'm trying to.
Oh no, we've got lots. If you've got time, we got time, my friend.
Okay.
So wrap away. Go for it. We're good. We're good. Yeah. Well, he's got a degree to get.
Clearly.
Indeed. Yeah. So if anybody wants to talk about meta Fibonacci sequences, that's a whole separate interview as well.
Nice.
So a couple of years ago, my wife, who's a freelance copy editor, she noticed a job posting at the Editors Association of Canada that said they were looking for someone to work on editing a Canadian English dictionary. And I thought, yeah, you know what? It's been like 20 years since we had a new update to the Canadian Oxford Dictionary, and that's getting really dated. And she just sort of gave me a 10-minute lecture on how being a professional editor in Canada is impossible, because you have to refer to a dictionary that's 20 years old if you want to know how to spell or describe something. And we use words very differently now than we did 20 years ago. Like, I'll get back to that. But so then I thought, you know what? As the acting chair of the North American Scrabble Players Association Dictionary Committee and ex officio editor of the North American Scrabble Players Word List, if I got in on the inside with a group of people working on editing a new dictionary, I could get new words into the Scrabble tournament lexicon so we could play them in Scrabble competitions faster than any other way, because I've usually had to sort of wait for dictionaries to be printed and then buy a copy and then get someone to read all the words in the dictionary and then type the ones that we should be good in Scrabble into our Scrabble database and so on. But I'm thinking, if I'm on the inside, that'll be great, and I get to talk about words with people that like words. So I think the only way I can do this is to apply for the position. I'll say, I can do that. I can edit your dictionary, and I think I probably could, because I edit the Scrabble dictionary, at least the Scrabble word list. And, I know a lot about words. And I know one thing I know about words is that you don't go to school to become a lexicographer, a dictionary writer. It's a craft. It's something that you learn by doing. And I've been doing it on an amateur basis for a while. And I have lots of friends who are lexicographers. And they're really looking for someone more like a project manager or a volunteer coordinator. And I've done that for the last 20 years of my life, so I could do that. But I thought, but there's a risk here. They might actually want me to do it, and I don't want to do that because I've already got these other jobs, and my wife will kill me if I take on another job. So I thought, I will do my best to present myself as poorly as I can in this interview. I will just phone it in, except of course Zoom. So I don't update my resume. I just go to LinkedIn. I guess everybody does this now, though. I go to LinkedIn. I hit export as PDF. I email it to them. I don't bother with a cover letter, and so I show up at the Zoom interview.
Dre's professional, sir.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Yes. That's amazing.
Well, there's a lot of work involved in not getting a job.
It's really hard.
I really don't want to get a job.
It's really difficult to not get the job.
That
It
is
is.
hilarious.
You tick all the boxes, and you're just like, oh God, I don't want to do this.
There is a lot of work in not getting a job. That is amazing. I love it. That's fantastic. Wow.
So I show up there, and there's the president of the Editors Association, and a distinguished professor of the English language and linguistics from University of British Columbia, and professional lexicographers, and all there just set to grill me. And I'm thinking, I don't want to really look stupid. This is going to be a really fine line to walk between,
not wanting the job, yeah, but not looking like a dummy. Exactly.
I don't want to succeed. I don't want to fail.
Yeah,
So,
you don't want your name out there like, oh, don't hire this guy or anything. Yeah, exactly.
But thankfully or not, they led with, so we think you're the guy, and they said, we really have not had any other serious candidates, so just, we've booked this time to interview you, just go ahead and tell us how you would do this. And so then I had to think on the fly about, well, actually, how would you edit a dictionary? And so, obviously the reason that I'm talking to you here is that they said, well, the job is yours if you want to. And then I had a long talk with my wife, and she said, what kind of a job is this? Is this the sort that pays money and takes a lot of your time? Is it the one type where you get a lot of hate mail? And I said, no money up front, money down the road, hate mail eventually down the road, it'll come with the money. And so I waited a couple of days and then eventually said, yeah, sure, I'll do this thing. But so the reason that it's difficult, the reason that it hasn't been one in a little while, I'm going to sort of give you a 2-minute history of Canadian lexicography. Mm-hmm. First of all, what is Canadian English? Do we actually have Canadian? Is there such a thing as Canadian English? It's hard to say. As with anything Canadian, our first stab at defining what something that is Canadian is by saying it's something that's not American, right? Mm-hmm. If the Americans spell it without the U, then we spell it with the U. If the Americans spell it ER, we spell it RE.
Right.
But you can't define things by negatives. The other big issue with defining what Canadian English is that Newfoundland English, is that the same as the English that they speak in downtown Montreal or the English that they speak in suburban Toronto? No, these are all very different things. Is the English that they speak in the far north the same? No, everybody speaks with a different set of words, with a different set of pronunciations even. So it's a little bit, takes some uncharacteristically un-Canadian gall to sort of set yourself as the arbiter of what is Canadian English. Thankfully, I've developed a fairly thick skin from editing the Scrabble dictionary, so I'm ready for that part. But so the idea of having a Canadian dictionary in the first place was not a Canadian idea. It was, of course, an American idea. And there was this guy named Charles Lovell who he's actually worth, I need to do a YouTube video about him or something. He left home as a teenager. He was a literal hobo. He rode the rails, going from library to library to research words, and eventually decided that he needed to do something with all of his knowledge, and he got hired by an American lexicographer to research Americanisms, words that were original to America and the United States. And while he was doing this, he noticed that a lot of words that they were putting into this dictionary that he was working on were actually Canadianisms, but the Americans were taking credit for it. And this bothered him, so he went on a trip up north to meet with some Canadian linguists and said, what is your problem? And this is in the 1950s. He said, what is your problem? Why don't you have a dictionary of your own? Britain's got Oxford and other dictionaries, and the United States at that point had probably half a dozen different good dictionaries, including Merriam-Webster.
Yeah.
So he came up here and said, why are you letting the Americans tell you what your language is, or even say that it's their language?
Yeah.
And so that led to a 10, 15-year project that culminated in 1967, the Canadian Centennial Year, with the first series of serious Canadian dictionaries published by what was then the Gage Publishing Company. And those ended up being in schools everywhere. If you're of a certain age, you'll remember the Big Fat Gage Dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as one of them was published, well, it's sort of a familiar Canadian story, but other publishers thought, other American-based publishers especially thought, oh, well, we could make some money off of that. And so they started taking American dictionaries and then sort of sprinkling a little bit of maple syrup on them and shipping them up north so that they could sell them as Canadian dictionaries.
Right.
And this sort of went on until the end of the last millennium, when Oxford University Press in particular said, we'll show you guys how to do it right. This is clearly, you've got a bunch of Americans and some Canadian hosers, basically, who have no idea what they're doing, editing dictionaries. You don't have the scholarship or credentials to do it. We will show you how it's done. And they came in and they produced, 2 editions. Catherine Barber produced 2 lovely editions of the Canadian Oxford Dictionary, and then sadly she died. But before she died, the Oxford University Press realized a fundamental fact about dictionaries in this century, which is you can't make money with them. It's not a commercial activity, because a dictionary takes millions of dollars, because they're really labor intensive, because you've got to research every word, and the words change faster than you can research them. So you have to have a large number of people. You need volunteers, but you also need they're gigantic, thankless projects, and if you try to run them as commercial enterprises, you'll fail. And everybody decided that over the course of the first decade in this century, which is why we have no dictionaries anymore. But so the editors need a dictionary. And they're not the only ones that need a dictionary. I mean, I would argue that everybody who reads or writes in English in Canada probably would benefit from having a dictionary. They would benefit from having a Canadian English dictionary being licensed to the major tech companies, so that when you select which dictionary you're auto-correcting to, you would say Canadian rather than US or UK.
That's right. The only place I know that actually does that is YouTube. YouTube actually has a selection where it says English, American, or Canadian.
Yeah. So Americans really don't get that. They say, can't you just choose between UK or the... One example that is often given is, if I go to the Costco in Toronto, and Costco is an American chain, if I go to the tire center at the Costco, I will see a sign there that can only appear in Canada, because it'll spell tire, T-I-R-E, the American way, and it'll spell center, C-E-N-T-R-E, the British way.
Right.
Tire would be with a Y in England, and center would be ER. So although those individual spellings, I say that they're from other countries, that phrase, tire center, is a purely Canadian thing that would not make sense anywhere else. And yet, if there isn't a dictionary to tell you that, then it's just word of mouth. And if you're trying to edit something or write something, if we don't do this right now, we will eventually end up in a world where Canadians are speaking nothing but, are reading and writing and communicating in only sort of AI-approved American English. So it's a critical moment to be doing it.
Oh, good for you, and honestly, good for all of you to be doing this. I do have a word that I actually want to run by you, because I know that it's said differently in different parts of the country. How many people are involved in this project? Well,
we've got about a dozen people. It's a lot fewer than you would think. We have about a dozen people that I meet with by Zoom over the course of a week. We have an editorial meeting and then a general meeting. We have a sign up on our website, CanadianEnglishDictionary.ca.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
For volunteers, and we've had over 50 people volunteer. In fact, 50 is kind of too many people to volunteer. So I had to choose one of them to be the volunteer coordinator, right?
I'm going to have to put my wife in touch with you because she's literally a logophile. Like my wife is literally like
Not
my
your
wife
I'm
is
thinking about
literally,
mine.
you know, she's literally, she would love some. Anyway, sorry.
So in effect, we are primarily looking for people that can help with the early stages of developing a dictionary at this point. And I'll tell you what we're doing is that by the end of the year, we hope to have all of the words and phrases that start with the letter Q defined. We started with the letter Q, which is an unusual choice for a dictionary because it's a short section of the dictionary, but it's a meaningful section of the dictionary. So, and it's also one that has changed a lot over the course of the last 20 years. We lost Queen Elizabeth, so any phrase like the Queen's Printer or Queen's Counsel, that has an obsolete definition. We've had geographical terms. If you're on the West Coast, you know it's not the Queen Charlotte Islands anymore. It's the Haida Gwaii. If you think about words like queer or queen, the situations in which you can say those and the reaction to using those words, say in a dark alley in downtown Toronto, are very different now from what they were 20 years ago.
Right.
And there's also, there's a lot of indigenous origin words. I'm in a long-running debate right now as to whether or not the word kayak should be spelled Kayak or Qajaq, which is more authentic to people from the far north. And then there's just things that ideas that didn't exist 20 years ago, like quadcopter for a drone or quadmester if you had to go beyond the semester system because your school system was cohorted during the pandemic. Just stuff like that. So we chose the letter Q. We're busily trying to define all of the words, and while we do that, we're developing our best practices, developing a series of guides to how to define words that'll guide us through the rest of the dictionary. So and developing the processes for that. So we're looking for people who have a knack for defining words, which is really difficult to identify, actually. I think we want more people like technical writers than creatives for that, because just the idea of how to precisely define something in a way that doesn't exclude things that aren't part of it, but includes everything that can be part of it.
Yeah.
It's tricky, right?
Because you're not looking necessarily for like fictional writers. You're looking more for like actual concrete, evidential.
Not people to make stuff up. Just like
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And also, we want people that have for the defining part. We need people that are that don't have big egos about their knowledge of English, because everybody will find if they look up a word, like in books.google.com or in a dictionary, they'll find that it's used in ways that they personally would not use it, that they might not have heard it being used. So you take the word like quiz, for example. A quiz, its meaning has changed a lot over the past 100 years, thanks to the influence of quiz shows. It really means right now just sort of like a pop quiz, a test of your knowledge.
Right.
But it used to mean like an eccentric person. And people don't use it that much, but so there's a question: does it belong in the dictionary? Well, yes, because one of the purposes of the dictionary is to help people understand older texts, basically any word that they might be encountering as a modern Canadian. They might want to look it up in a dictionary to say what was this person talking about. And there are still people that were born like a long time ago who write using the language of a long time ago. Yeah. So there's that. The next step beyond definers is we need people to edit that, and those we have a lot of, because we started off with the Editors Association.
Right.
At least 40 of the 50 people are editors, and they're saying we're happy to edit things, but we don't want to come up with new things. Come up with new content. Beyond that, the usual needs that an organization has: people to do interviews like this, people to push our social media, people to organize things. I mean, we just only at the beginning of this month managed to get ourselves incorporated, and we've got to go down the process of setting ourselves up as a charity. And
good old incorporation. Oh yes, lots of fun. Yeah.
So, but
it takes like basically, an hour.
If you like words, there's almost certainly something that you could do to help us with our project. So
that is super cool.
What's the link again? What's the link?
I
again?
just sent it to you, Derek. I
no,
emailed
I
it
want
to you.
I want everybody to know.
Oh,
again.
sorry.
Canadian English Dictionary.ca.
.ca. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about
I'm blown
about
away by
a
this
word.
conversation, by the way.
Yeah, so am I. Actually, you are just properly awesome. Okay, so there's a word that I know. I'm a musician. Derek is a musician as well.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was to go on tour all throughout Canada in the sort of the central and on the west coast, I'm going on tour. On the east coast, I'm going on tour. So I'm wondering, like, words like that, how do you end up kind of getting them into a dictionary and sort of having the definition of what it is, and, obviously there's things like a golf tour. So there's all sorts of different types of tours. But how do you, again, also show the different pronunciations of the words?
So dictionaries, not to get too technical about it, dictionaries traditionally have two different ways of expressing pronunciations. They've got what's called the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA, which is used everywhere outside of the United States. And they have so-called respelling systems where you spell a made-up word that, if pronounced by a typical speaker, might come out sounding the way you want the word to be pronounced. And you can probably tell that I'm leaning more towards the former rather than the latter. There's more subtlety to it. The reason that I prefer IPA is that one of the major groups of people that are interested in their dictionary is first-generation immigrants to Canada who are native speakers of English. That is to say, people who've come here from other English-speaking parts of the world, but notice that when they speak their English, every now and then people have no idea what they're talking about, or people just stop and look at them funny and say, "You're not from around here, are you?" Mm-hmm. So for them, everybody outside of North America is used to the IPA, so it would be, I think, a good place to start. For our online dictionary, we do IPA. We will eventually, early on, have automatically generated audio versions because it's easy to convert IPA to audio.
Fantastic.
And probably at some point we will do some sort of respelling system, just because there's a lot of demand for it from people who grew up with those. But as I said, you don't get accuracy when you do respelling systems. So I'm not keen on those. Mind you, this doesn't really answer the question that's sort of underlying the premise of your question, which was the tour versus tour distinction. And for that, basically, we have to do what past lexicographers have done, which is we pick one variety of Canadian English to privilege over others, and then we explain how the others differ from that in some front matter. So typically, the main pronunciation will be given as tour. That is to say, we would probably be using an educated urban variety of central Canadian English. So that is to say, the way it's spoken, actually not even necessarily central. So the way English is spoken by educated people in downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver or downtown Winnipeg, downtown Calgary. Not Montreal, because there's significant differences to the language there. And then there'd be in the front matter to the dictionary when it's eventually published, or in an article on the blog when it's eventually created, will be explanations of how the phonology differs from one part of the country to another, and how, if you want to sound like you're from down east, you need to say tour, not tour.
Yeah.
I'm still stuck on 40, but I'm still like continuously losing it every time you say something else, and I'm like this is the most fascinating thing, and the thing
cool.
I love broken English.
Mm-hmm.
I love it, right? Because it tells me broken English tells me that this isn't your English isn't your first language, which means you speak another language. Yeah. And that fascinates the crap out of me, because I have the hardest time learning anything. My family's from Denmark, and I don't speak Danish. I don't. My youngest sister speaks Danish. My younger brother speaks Danish, and my parents speak Danish, and my grandparents spoke Danish, but I don't.
It's
no idea why.
It's a difficult language to learn to pronounce because the speech sound more like respiratory illness to English speakers.
It's true. I always thought my grandmother had a cold.
Yeah.
But what you say is right. That there are so many different varieties of English being spoken in Canada because half the people in Toronto are born outside of Canada. My mother used to say that she thought Toronto would be a good place to improve her English skills, and it turned out to be the worst place in the world because people are way too tolerant here of any type of English because people with thick Chinese accents have to be able to communicate to do business with people with thick South Asian accents, and they use English as the lingua franca because that's what everybody here in theory speaks. But you'll never hear anybody here correcting someone else's English. I mean, unless they're an editor. So the other
unless
thing
they say something like that's absolutely wrong.
Well, or if they say something that indicates they're an American. Right. So that's another category.
Oh, then we nail them to the wall.
Yeah.
That's what we do there.
You can't talk that way up here.
You can't. Yeah. We don't say stuff like that.
That's right.
My dad,
red hat away.
My dad, who was born in the United States and moved here actually as shortly after I was born, said one of the hardest habits for an American to stop using linguistically was the phrase "in this country." And Americans tend to say, well, in this country, we don't do that, regardless of what country they happen to be in. And that's something that really grates on Canadian, actually everywhere around the world, that grates on people's nerves when Americans do that.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the volunteer thing. One area there, so much to talk about. In addition to the Editors Association, we're partnered with something called the Canadian English Lab at UBC, run by Professor Stefan Dollinger, and also with the Strathy English Unit at Queen's University. Queen's University the Strathy unit there has created something called the Canadian English Corpus, where corpus is a linguistics term for collection of representative sample of all of the uses of a language, a large sampling of a language that people can study to figure out what exactly is Canadian English. So they're in the process of updating their Canadian English corpus to serve as a foundation for our dictionary. And one of the things that they're doing right now is that they're actively recruiting writers, playwrights and authors and so on who want to contribute content to the corpus for research purposes. And then eventually one thing that I really liked about the Gage Dictionary is the frequency with which they use examples, because there's nothing better than an example to illustrate to someone who isn't familiar with a word how a word is actually used. And so we're looking for people who are writers, authors, playwrights, poets, who are willing to let us quote from their work as examples of ideal or typical Canadian English. So if you've already done the writing, right? If you've already done the writing, we don't expect you to do it again in the form of a definition. But if you think you've written what is the great Canadian novel, and it's got some interesting uses, especially of words starting with the letter Q, then please get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to use yours.
Oh, that's so cool. You were talking about there being a million things to talk about in regards to recruiting new people and people to help out with this. Is there anything else that you can think of as far as any other help that you can think of that you might need?
We're getting close to the point where we will be making a financial appeal, and that'll go up on our website, and you'll hear about it when we do. At this point, I've really been touched by the amount of volunteer labor and in-kind contributions that we've had. When we've had to pay people, it's come out of people's university grant money. But mostly people, if I tell them, if you want to define a few words, eventually I'll put you on the payroll. They'll say, here, have a dozen definitions, or everybody that's been working on the project so far, including myself, has been doing so entirely pro bono because we think, we believe strongly that it's something that the country needs to help maintain our sense of national identity.
No, absolutely. I've got a couple of questions here for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a favorite set of reference books, or a favorite dictionary, or a favorite etymological dictionary, or anything like that? Is there anything that stands out that you think to yourself, I loved it when I read that back in the day?
I have a second question to this.
Yeah, I'm gonna possibly upset some people, but because I have a lot of friends that work at Merriam-Webster, the dictionary publishing company. But my favorite dictionary growing up was the Webster's New World Dictionary, which was one of their major competitors. And the reason that it was my favorite was that they gave very detailed etymologies or word origins for all of their words. And you could look up any word and it would tell you this goes back to Old English word this, and French that, and Latin, back all the way back to Proto-Indo-European roots. And it's just a lot of work to do that, and I don't think we'll get there in my lifetime for the Canadian English Dictionary, but etymologies were a big part of my life growing up, so that was definitely my favorite.
Nice. Go ahead, Derek.
Okay. So we have your favorite dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
So Sir Ben Kingsley was asked live on air at one point what his favorite word in the English language was, and he came out with an expletive, which I'm refraining from saying.
Good for you, Derek.
Because I want to upset the Army Chris. But it started with an F and didn't say fire truck.
Okay.
So in the vein of what we're talking about your Canadian English Dictionary today, what would be like for you would be the ultimate, like your Top Gear, like Canadian, this is a Canadian word, and like no one else can claim this. This is a Canadian word and this is where it sits.
I could think of a couple.
So, Professor Stefan Dollinger at the University of British Columbia he's written a book about Canadianisms, and he edits a work that's going to be a big contributor to ours called The Dictionary of Canadianisms on Historical Principles. And it is an online catalog of every word that is a Canadianism. And being a good Austrian academic, he's subcategorized Canadianisms according to whether they are Canadian in origin. I'm not going to be able to get the whole list. Canadian in origin, Canadian because we kept the word after everybody else stopped using it. Canadian because we changed the meaning. Canadian because it has a special meaning to us that is positive. Canadian because it has a special meaning to us that is negative. And there's one more, but I don't remember what it is. And just reading through his dictionary is just such it's a collection of rabbit holes that take you into our history. You learn things that you don't want to know. You learn things that you do want to know.
Yeah.
You learn. I think the first one that I came across in the letter, researching the letter Q, was the phrase quadruped snowshoe, and I was thinking, what the heck is that, and what would you need it for? A quadruped snowshoe is a bag of hay that you tie onto the bottom of a mule's foot when you're trying to get it to drag stuff out of a mine in the mountains in BC in the 19th century. And I was thinking, yeah, so okay, there's that. One of your in your chat, someone is asking about the word kayak. Kayak is an interesting question because, as I said earlier, do you spell it K-A-Y-A-K or Q-A-J-A-Q? And I would rather spell it Q-A-J-A-Q, and I would rather pluralize it Kayait, Q-A-J-A-I-T, except that a kayak doesn't necessarily mean what is known as a kayak in the far north here. In England or the United States, they put motors on kayaks and sails on kayaks and build them out of fiberglass, and they make things that I don't think are kayaks, but maybe kayaks with a K.
That's just weird.
There's a word that I found that was missing from the Dictionary of Canadianisms, which came up actually in a conversation with a group of Jane Siberry, your last week's guests, support team last week, which was the word haw-eater, Haweater.
Haw-eater.
Haw-eater. That is purely Canadian. It's actually a very local Canadian word. It's only found in one part. Would you care to guess what a haw-eater is?
I want to know where it's from.
It is from...
What region? What region are you talking about?
It is from the largest island in a lake in the world.
Oh, Jesus.
And that island, if you're a geographical trivia fan, also has the largest lake on an island. It goes down to, it's got the largest island on a lake on an island on a lake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's the island in question is Manitoulin Island, and a haw-eater refers to someone who was born on Manitoulin Island.
Really?
Where they have hawberries that are a traditional source of vitamin C.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. For me, it's always whatever the most recent word that I've come across that is the one that comes to mind first. Before this, the word that I was struggling to define for the dictionary was the word. I'm going to pronounce it and then spell it. I pronounce it quahog, and it can be spelled Cohog, but I prefer to spell it, because it's more points in Scrabble, Quahaug. So
Haug?
That's a lot of letters.
So, any guesses what a quahog is?
I have no idea. I know it's where
A quahog?
Family Guy's place.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
That's all I know.
It is. There you go. Okay, and so it's a word that comes from Rhode Island, and it refers to a type of clam.
It's Kumquat said that right off the they're like it's a sea creature.
It is one of the types of shells that was used by First Nations peoples in the United States to create what we call wampum. It is still used as it's what you make clam chowder out of if you're in New England.
Nice.
But it's actually the more you delve into it, the more complicated it gets, because biologists divide quahogs into 3 different species, 2 of which are related and the third one isn't. They all sort of look the same, but then you try to think, how am I going to explain this in a dictionary definition that's shorter than an encyclopedia entry? And so far I've gotten it down to like 20 lines, but I really want to get it down to 5 lines. But the more you read about any specific thing, the harder it is to leave information out. So like there's this one type of quahog called the ocean quahog, which is found mainly in Iceland and the northern Atlantic. It's known for the fact that there was a quahog that was harvested maybe 10 years ago. They knew that quahogs lived to ridiculously old ages. They had long lives. They dissected one and did a scanning electron microscopy thing with its shell, and found that it was 500 years old, and it set the record for the longest lived life form animal in the world whose age had been precisely determined. So I'm thinking that's more trivia and more encyclopedic than dictionary. But now that I've heard this, and now that I also know that you can get ocean quahogs in Canada, how can I not? I know, I'll put it in a usage example. Did you know ocean quahogs are? So that's probably the way that it'll end up. But
I'm going to pull that out at parties.
And of course, it ends up being in the Q section, which you're working really hard on anyway. So that's perfect, right?
There you go.
Right now, nothing but Q's. Yep.
Yeah.
What was the first? When you started in? What was the first word?
Q, the letter Q, which is difficult on its own. I looked at the letter Q, and I thought, no, this is going to be for the second pass through because it's hard to define the letter Q as an abbreviation, as a letter, its scientific uses. You end up going into deep philosophical territory when you say, what's the difference between, when you say Q, do you mean the letter as it's printed on a piece of paper, or the sound that you think it makes, or the arbitrary concept of Q is the 17th one. Yeah, 17th letter of a sequence, right? If you label things A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. Or do you mean something that is abbreviated to Q, like a question or a queen or that sort of thing? So it was too complicated an entry, so I decided I was going to jump over to something much easier to define, and then discovered that nothing is really easy to define if you look at it closely enough.
Yeah.
So, and that was something that actually the professional lexicographers that I worked with reminded me of time and again, which is that if you want to actually get a dictionary written, you need to develop the skills to avoid falling into the rabbit holes and figure out, conciseness, which clearly is not my forte. 45 minutes into a half-hour interview.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, hey, listen, like I said, we're good. So if you're good, we're good. I wanted to I wanted to ask you if there is a word that kind of, as that you've been going through and doing all of this incredible work that you and your team are doing, is there a word that all of you just kind of were like, I can't believe I forgot that word is completely like loony or something? Like, is there something that you all were just like, oh my goodness, I can't
they're on Q,
believe
they're
that's
not on L.
Right.
Well, there was actually surprising omission from, like, so when we the very first step in defining a section of words is deciding which words you're going to include, and it has to be an approximation at first. But I mean, first we look at at our predecessor, the Canadian Oxford Dictionary, and we see what words they looked at, and then we look at the Gage Dictionary because it has a different sort of editorial policy. We'll look at Merriam-Webster's online publications to see what's current. I do searches through any documents that I can get my hands on from the corpus, including the staff at several of the Hansard offices at legislatures across the country have been very helpful in providing legislative records that I can scan through. So I look for new words, and that was how I came across things like the modern sense of the word quad chair. Actually, there's a bunch of quad words. Quad has become a more productive prefix than it used to be. But anyway, so you look at all these words, and you also keep an eye out as you're working on the letter Q for, in conversation, did someone use a word? Because if you've been staring at a few thousand Q words for several months, if someone uses a word that is not in that list, you'll realize right away. There's an excellent episode. I'll get back to. No, actually, I can digress into that. Are you familiar with the comedy series Blackadder by Rowan Atkinson?
Yes.
Very much so. Yeah.
I don't look Blackadder like a bird that swallowed a plate.
Have you watched do you recall the episode where the lexicographer appears and Blackadder starts using? He just starts making up words to drive the lexicographer insane, because the lexicographer thinks that he's completed his work, and he just starts making up ridiculous words. The guy keeps flipping. What did you say? How do you spell that? So, and I thought he was just having fun, but it turns out no. If you've actually spent a lot of time studying a set of words, and then someone uses a word that should have been on that list that is not, it just sets off alarm bells in your head. So the most recent one of that sort that I found I was really surprised that none of our the Canadian Oxford Dictionary does not list Queen's University as an entry.
Oh, and wow!
You'd think major Canadian institution like that.
Yeah,
they list the New York City borough of Queens, but not Queen's University, and you're thinking that's a really strange bias.
Wow.
So
weird. Why?
Always American, right? Always American.
Well, maybe they don't like Dan Aykroyd.
It's an illustration of how it's difficult. No, it's impossible to get it 100% right, which is why I look at the project as being an ongoing, sustainable one. And this is something that I made in my original pitch to the Editors Association. I said, we're building something that's going to be around, I hope, for decades, if not centuries. We want to build the Canadian equivalent to the Oxford English Dictionary. I mean, if you're going to be ambitious, you might as well aim for the sky. But it's
darn right. Yep.
We want something that's going to be updated on a regular basis. And the good thing about updating things on a regular basis is that you can never be justly accused of being incomplete. You can just say, "Oh, Queen's University, that'll be in the next edition. Don't worry about it." So, and language is continuously evolving, right? There are words that people use this year that they weren't using last year, or that they've changed the meanings of. So, it is something that we have to be constantly on the lookout for. This has been the coolest freaking interview that we've done, and like, honest to God, so straight up honest, I'm not a brainiac, right? I'm not one of those guys. If you ask me anything about, like, who recorded, the Beatles' Rubber Soul album in 1965, I could tell you easily. But you know what I mean? There's certain things that I'm very knowledgeable about, and I'll be straight up honest with you. I was kind of a little intimidated after seeing, like, your LinkedIn page and seeing, seeing everything, kind of a little intimidated, but lengthy. You are just so freaking cool. Like, so my wife and I, really quickly, my wife and I, every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, do a little thing we play called reindeer games. Don't say it, Derek. We play reindeer games at 8 p.m. every Sunday night, and my wife is just the creator of all the content. We do a Mad Lib every week, right? Because she writes some of the best Mad Libs you've ever seen in your life, right? And she asks me, I feel good when I'm like, I can give you a transitive verb or an intransitive verb, like, things like that, right? So it's so much fun. But anyway, the kumquats are awesome. That's our friend Angela. She actually joins us on that program quite often. I should get you to play with us. That would be freaking wicked. We've got to get John on reindeer games for sure. I'm happy to. Yep. Oh my God, that would be amazing. There should be a Scrabble portion. There should, actually. If I could figure out a way to do like an online Scrabble thing. I'm sure, By the way, reindeer games where you win absolutely nothing, not even the adoration of your friends. That's right. Very funny, Derek Lewis, and I made fun of you on the 100th episode with that. We'll talk to John about that later. But anyway, listen, is there anything else that you want to share with us? Is there anything that... as far as like addresses or anything like that you want to let people know where they can join, where they can help you? No, I'm good, thanks. I think just the website that's got contact information, it's got a form people can fill out if they want to be on our mailing list and so on. Yeah. And so. Absolutely. That is great. Man, putting it in the link right that is just so cool to be able to be like, I think that's really neat to be able to be part of like something historical like that, like actually have not like fanfare and ticker tape parades or anything, but to be able to be like, poutine. I defined poutine. It is literally meaningful work. Yeah, that's super rad. Yeah, that is absolutely brilliant. What you just said, that's got to be your slogan, my friend. We have the most meaningful work. I have to write that down because I just thought of it. Right? I think it's going to be our slogan. Yeah. And your friends at Canadian as Heck helped you get there. I'm just kidding. It was all you. It was totally all you. The Canadian English Dictionary, where you could win absolutely nothing, not even the adoration of your peers. John Chu, this has been an absolute pleasure, my friend. We want to thank our dear friend Jane Siberry for making this happen. So Jane, thank you so much. And John, I am going to talk to you if you don't mind about reindeer games. I would love to get you on sometime because that'd be so much fun. Yeah. And you don't have to worry about the Ethernet and all that stuff. The way that you're on right now is perfect. Okay, so we'll have some fun with that. But this has been an amazing interview. Thank you so much for your time. And we are going to spin from Bound by the Beauty back in 1989. We're going to spin a beautiful tune for you by your friend Jane Siberry called Hockey. So again, thank you so much for your time, John. All the best. Thank you, Derek. Thanks so much. Have a great night.